Not all battles are fought on the front lines. Some take place in the quiet corners of our lives, where assumptions clash with truth and rank doesn't matter. Tonight, we're taking you on a journey, a true-to-life fiction story inspired by real events. What happens when the highest rank in the Air Force meets the lowest rank in humanity? A decorated officer, the epitome of discipline and achievement, on a quiet drive through a small southern town. His career is a testament to breaking barriers and rising above. But what happens when he's pulled over by an officer who sees only the color of his skin? This is not just a story about bias, it's a reflection of a society that still wrestles with the weight of its past. Stick with us to the very end, because what unfolds will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about equality, humanity, and respect. Before we dive in, take a moment to subscribe to Whispered Story World, where every story holds a mirror to society, sparking reflection and change. Let's begin. General Charles Q. Brown Jr. had faced challenges many could not fathom. As the first African-American Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, his journey was one of shattering glass ceilings and rewriting history. But on this particular day, as he drove through a sleepy southern town, his thoughts weren't on his achievements. They were on his family, his wife, his children, and the future he was fighting to protect. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. He wasn't in a rush, but he wanted to get to his destination, a small gathering of community leaders where he would speak about diversity and leadership. The irony, as he would soon discover, was that his most profound message wouldn't be delivered on that stage, but in the unlikeliest of encounters. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the road. It was the kind of evening that felt peaceful, almost serene. But peace is often deceptive, the quiet before the storm. As General Brown's car approached the outskirts of town, a pair of flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Red and blue danced across the darkening landscape, breaking the serenity like a crack of thunder. He pulled over, his mind racing not with fear but with calculated calm. He'd been here before, in situations where his uniform or rank didn't shield him from the assumptions others made. This time, he wasn't wearing his uniform. This time, he was just another driver. And in this town, that made all the difference. The officer approached the car, his footsteps deliberate, his posture stiff. General Brown lowered his window, the cool evening air brushing against his face. "License and registration," the officer said curtly, his voice carrying an edge that was hard to ignore. General Brown complied, his movements steady. He knew the drill: keep your hands visible, speak respectfully, avoid sudden motions. These weren't just tips. They were survival tactics for moments like this. As the officer examined his documents, his eyes darted to General Brown, scrutinizing him as though trying to place him in a box. "What's someone like you doing driving a car like this?" the officer asked, the words dripping with presumption. General Brown paused, his eyes meeting the officer's. He could have responded sharply, called out the implicit bias in the question. Instead, he chose restraint. "I'm traveling to a speaking engagement," he replied simply. But inside, he felt the familiar sting, the unspoken accusation, the reduction of his worth to a stereotype. It wasn't new, but it never ceased to cut deep. The officer's questions grew more pointed, his tone more confrontational. "Step out of the car," he ordered, his hand brushing the holster on his hip. General Brown stepped out, his back straight, his demeanor calm but unyielding. The officer circled the car, his flashlight scanning the interior. "Is there a problem, officer?" General Brown asked, his voice steady but firm. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," the officer replied vaguely. "And what description would that be?" General Brown pressed, his patience thinning. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he retreated to his patrol car, leaving General Brown standing by the roadside, illuminated by the harsh glare of headlights. Minutes felt like hours as the general waited, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He thought of others who had stood in his shoes or worse, who hadn't lived to tell the tale. He thought of the young men and women whose futures were cut short because of encounters like these. And he thought of the duty he carried not just to lead, but to confront the injustices that persisted, even in the shadows of progress. When the officer returned, his demeanor hadn't softened. He thrust General Brown's documents back at him. "This isn't adding up," he muttered. General Brown reached into his wallet, pulling out a card. It wasn't a flashy display of power. It was a necessity, a reminder of who he was, of the respect he had earned. He handed the card to the officer. The officer glanced at it dismissively at first, but then his eyes widened. His face paled as he read the name and title. General Charles Q. Brown, Jr., Chief of Staff, United States Air Force. The silence was deafening. The officer looked up, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words coming out. "Is there a problem, officer?" General Brown asked again, his tone unchanged. The officer stammered, his confidence unraveling. I didn't realize, sir." General Brown held his gaze. "And why should it matter who I am? Shouldn't everyone be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their rank or title?" The encounter ended without further incident, but the impact lingered. As General Brown drove away, he thought about the officer not with anger, but with resolve. Change wouldn't come from a single moment or a single conversation. It would come from countless moments, countless conversations, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. In his rearview mirror, the patrol car grew smaller until it disappeared altogether, but the questions remained. How many more people would endure what he had endured? How many wouldn't have the privilege of a title or a car to defuse the situation? General Brown's story isn't just his. It's the story of countless individuals who navigate a world where bias and assumptions still hold sway. It's a reminder that the fight for justice isn't over, not for him, not for any of us. What would you have done in the officer's shoes? What about General Brown's? How can we challenge ourselves to see beyond the surface, to recognize the humanity in each other before the titles, the uniforms, the stereotypes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation that matters. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Whispered Story World, where we bring untold stories to life, stories that make us think, feel, and grow.